So here is something that should not be possible inside that family. The two people in that building who never move first, who never brief a newspaper, who never in 50 years have made a private matter into a public one, are working on the same thing at the same time. Princess Anne and Prince William. And the thing they are working on sits next to the king at every engagement, smiles for every camera, and holds a title that took her 30 years and a national argument to get. Camilla has had a very rough few weeks, and from everything the sources are saying, it gets worse from here. Stay with me on this one, because there is a story developing inside Buckingham Palace right now that honestly feels like it has been building for 30 years. And if you like the kind of story where the quiet people turn out to have been counting all along, take a second and subscribe, because this one has two moving parts, and they are moving toward each other. Quick word before we go further. I'm Harold. I spend my time going through the filings, the accounts, the records, and the small print around this family. The things that get published properly and then never mentioned again by anybody. And what you are about to hear is me putting the pieces together the way I read them. Stay with me to the end, because the last part of this is where it lands, and it is not what you think it is. By the time weeks finish, you will know what started this. You will know what Anne has been reading. You will know what William has been doing with the money, and you will know why the woman who won every single round of this fight is now in the worst position she has been in for years. Let me start with what kicked this off, because there was a specific moment that made people inside that palace sit up and pay attention. About 3 weeks before this story started circulating, a senior palace aide made a phone call that sources describe as highly unusual. Now, unusual is a word people throw around, so let me tell you what makes this one unusual. The call skipped the press, it skipped the government, it skipped every standard person you ring when you are managing a royal communication situation and you want a story shaped before lunchtime. It went to a lawyer on behalf of Princess Anne about Camilla. The call lasted under 10 minutes. Short, precise, and according to sources, the kind of conversation somebody has when the decision is already made, and all that is left is confirming the path is clear. Think about that for a second. Nobody makes a 10-minute call to a lawyer to ask what their options are. A 10-minute call is a person checking that the thing they have already decided to do can be done. That call, sources say, was the first move in something much bigger. And I want you to hold it in your head, because everything after it makes a different kind of sense once you know it happened. Now, Anne has been a member of that family for over 70 years. She watched every single bit of it unfold in real time and from about 4 feet away. The affairs, the separation, the panorama interview, the divorce, Diana's death, all of it, from inside the house with a front row seat and no way of leaving the room. And she managed her feelings about all of it professionally and privately, the way she manages absolutely everything, which is to say she said nothing to anybody for 30 years. And the natural question is the one you are already asking. The timing is the puzzle. 3 decades of keeping this lockdown tighter than anybody in that family has ever kept anything. Sources say the answer has 2 parts, and you need both of them, because either one on its own looks like an accident. The first part is William. His position inside that institution has changed over the past 18 months in a way that most people watching from outside have not fully registered. He has stopped waiting in the wings. The son who turned up, cut a ribbon and went home is gone. He is making real financial decisions with real consequences for real people, and the Duchy of Cornwall is where you can see it most clearly. Let me explain the Duchy quickly, because it matters and it takes 10 seconds. It is not pocket money, and it is not a title. It is a private estate of land, property and investments worth about £1.2 billion, and the heir to the throne runs it. Farms, cottages, commercial holdings, rent coming in from thousands of tenants. William controls all of it. No consultation required. No approval needed from Charles or from anybody else in that building. He decides who is paid, who is dropped, and what the money is pointed at. And the clearest public signal of how William planned to use that control came when he removed Annabel Elliot from the Duchy payroll. That is Camilla's younger sister, interior designer. She worked across duchy properties under Charles for nearly 20 years, earning somewhere between £19,000 and £82,000 a year depending on the project. And all of that sits in the duchy's own published accounts, so this part is not gossip and you can go and read it yourself. The moment William took over the duchy after Queen Elizabeth's death, Annabel's name stopped appearing in those financial records. No public dispute, no statement, no explanation offered to anybody. Gone. And she was not replaced with some neutral professional hire that nobody could read anything into. William brought in his own people, friends from his personal circle, godparents of his children, people loyal specifically and exclusively to him. Royal commentators picked up on it almost immediately and noted it was causing significant ripples inside that palace, and honestly, I do not know how it could have caused anything else. That decision sent a message that did not need any translation at all. It did not need a press release. Everybody who needed to understand it understood it inside a week. Anne watched that happen, and according to sources, she approved completely. Sources suggest that decision opened a conversation between Anne and William that had been waiting years to take place, because both of them, for very different but personal reasons, had arrived at the same point at roughly the same time. Done waiting. I am going to hold the second part of the answer back for a minute, because it is the part that changes the shape of everything else, and if I give it to you now, you will hear it as a sentimental line about a woman who died a long time ago. It is not that. It has a date on it, and the date is coming. The second part of the answer is Diana. The 31st of August 2027 will be 30 years since Diana died in that Paris tunnel. 30 years since William, at 15 years old, had to walk behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London, in a dark suit, with his head down, in front of the entire world and every camera that world could point at a boy. He is 44 now, a husband, a father of 3. And in nearly 30 years of public life, he has never once made a direct statement connecting his feelings about Camilla to his feelings about what his mother went through. He never had to. His actions have been making that statement quietly and consistently for years, and anybody who has been watching properly has been able to read them. Sources say Anne reached a point sometime in the past several months where she decided she was finished. Finished allowing institutional loyalty to override private conviction. Finished watching Camilla occupy spaces, literal ones and symbolic ones, that sources suggest Anne believes belong to Diana's legacy, rather than to the woman who spent years contributing to Diana's suffering. And I want to be careful here, because Anne is not a woman who makes speeches about her feelings. She watched Diana up close during those years. She carries her own version of that grief, and she has carried it the way she carries everything, which is silently and for a very long time. Sources say she allegedly decided it was time to act on it. And when she acted, she had access to something that is now making certain people inside Buckingham Palace genuinely nervous. There is a room at Windsor Castle called the Royal Archives. No tourists, no documentary crews, no public access of any kind. Inside it sits the unfiltered, unedited, privately recorded history of the British royal family. Letters, diaries, internal correspondence. The written record of what was happening inside that institution during the most turbulent decades of the 20th century, including the years when Charles and Diana's marriage was visibly and catastrophically falling apart in front of the whole country. Princess Anne has access to those materials at a level very few people outside the immediate family possess, and sources suggest she has been reviewing them. Take a moment with that, because I keep coming back to it. The most disciplined person in that family, 76 years old, sitting in a room almost nobody is allowed into, going through the private written record of the worst years that family has ever had, 3 weeks before somebody rang a lawyer on her behalf. The question worth sitting with is a simple one, and it is exactly which pages from the 80s and 90s certain people allegedly do not want surfacing right now, because the broad strokes are already public knowledge, and they have been for a very long time. The separation in 1992, the tapes in 1993, Charles' television confession in 1994, Diana's Panorama interview in 1995, the divorce in 1996, Diana's death in 1997. All of that is documented, analyzed, and argued over across 30 years of books and documentaries, and none of it would make anybody nervous because the country digested it a generation ago. Sources suggest the material in those archives goes well beyond the broad strokes. It is the specificity, the private, contemporaneous written record of who knew what, when they knew it, who facilitated what, and how they did it. The internal institutional dimension of a situation that the public record only ever partially captured. The way Diana's concerns were received inside that building when she raised them. The way the institution handled a member of its own family suffering in a manner that was both very documented and very public. And that difference is the whole thing. The public knows the story. The archive knows the machinery. According to sources familiar with Anne's alleged archival review, the materials tell a story about institutional failure that goes considerably further than anything publicly available has ever documented. And Anne, sources say, believes that story deserves to be part of the complete historical record rather than shaped and softened by the preferences of the people who would very much rather it stayed in the dark. Camilla is one of those people. A complete and accurate historical record of that marriage is not a comfortable document for the current queen, and it never was going to be. That has been true since the day she married him. The difference now is the person allegedly asking whether that record should stay contained. Somebody with the access, somebody with the authority, and, honestly, somebody with the personal motivation to do something about it. Sources suggest Anne's position is straightforward. And it is the kind of position she has held her entire life, which is to say she has probably not changed a word of it in 20 years. The historical record of that period should be complete and unredacted. And the woman now sitting beside the king at every state occasion has no right whatsoever to shape how the most painful chapter of Diana's life gets remembered. That is allegedly where Anne keeps landing, every time. And that conclusion, sources say, has implications for Camilla that go well beyond anything happening with property or payroll, because a payroll decision costs you money and a historical record costs you the version of yourself you spent 20 years building. Somebody left a comment under one of my videos a while back that has stayed with me ever since, and it fits this exactly. They said that family does not punish people. It stops protecting them. I read it twice at the time and moved on. Then this story turned up and that comment has been sitting in the back of my head through every part of it. Now let me show you what William has been doing at the same time, because this is where it stops being one person's private conviction and starts being an operation. The Duchy of Cornwall generated approximately £30 million in a single year in 2025. Tenant farms, holiday cottages, the Isles of Scilly, land rights across Dartmoor, commercial investments built up across nearly 700 years of royal estate management, all of it accumulating quietly while the rest of the country got on with its life. Every pound of that controlled solely by William. And sources suggest he has been using that control with a precision that people inside Camilla's circle are only now fully appreciating. The Annabel Elliot removal was the opening move, and it was significant enough on its own. Sources say what followed went considerably further. Access to crown events, proximity to official royal occasions, invitations that had previously been extended to members of Camilla's wider circle, quietly withdrawn. Appearances where Parker Bowles' family members had expected to be present, restructured without explanation, without a conversation, without anybody ever having to sit in a room and say a hard sentence out loud. The same slow, deliberate, entirely deniable narrowing of access that characterized the Elliot situation applied more broadly across every connection between Camilla's family and the institution William now controls. And this is the part people miss. Nothing in that list generates a headline on its own. A name off a guest list is nothing. A cancelled invitation is nothing. Each one of them, taken alone, is a scheduling decision that any private secretary could explain away in a sentence. Step back and look at the full picture across 3 years, and it is unmistakable. That is how that family does things to people. Never in one blow, always in 100 small ones, none of which can be complained about, all of which add up to a person finding themselves outside a door they used to walk through without thinking. And then there is the Diana dimension of what William is doing financially, which sources describe as entirely intentional. William has been quietly redirecting certain duchy-connected philanthropic resources toward causes Diana originally championed. Mental health, homelessness, HIV awareness, the causes Diana made her own during her lifetime, and these are the ones the establishment initially resisted her championing, because they were considered too raw and too political for a senior royal to touch. She was told, in the polite language that building uses, that it was inappropriate. Diana touched them anyway, and she paid an institutional price for it that she was still paying on the day she died. Now her son controls £1.2 billion in assets and $30 million a year in income, and sources say he is pointing a portion of that at exactly the places his mother pointed when the institution she belonged to was actively working to contain her. Sit with the symmetry of that. The money that came from the institution that punished her is now being spent on the things it punished her for. Sources say Anne has privately expressed something that in anybody less disciplined you would call satisfaction. In Anne, it probably looked like a single nod at a kitchen table and then a change of subject. Because what Anne is allegedly doing with the archives and what William is allegedly doing with the duchy represent what sources describe as a two-front operation. History on one side, money on the other. The past and the future, both allegedly being reshaped at the same time, by the two people in that family with the most personal reasons to reshape them and the least interest in explaining themselves to anybody. And Camilla is caught directly in the middle of it, with a husband who cannot help her in a position that depends entirely on him. Now, this next stretch is my reading of it rather than anybody's confirmed account, and I will say that once and then get out of your way. I do not think either of them sat down and drew up a plan. I think two people who had been separately fed up for a very long time found out in one conversation that the other one was fed up too. And that is far more dangerous than a plan, because a plan can be negotiated with and two people who have quietly agreed on something cannot. Her ceremonial position is being affected too, and this part of the story is worth paying very close attention to, because it is subtle in a way that makes it easy to miss unless you are watching for it. Stay with me here, because this next section is where I start to understand why sources are using the word darkest about her position, and it has nothing to do with money at all. On the 6th of May 2023, Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey wearing a tiara that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth and had been one of the late Queen's personal favourites, a piece the country had been looking at on its own banknotes for decades without ever really thinking about it. That was a statement, a carefully chosen signal that Camilla had arrived, that her position was legitimate, that the argument was finally over. For her supporters, it was a triumphant moment, and on the day it played exactly as intended. For other people inside that palace, sources suggest it was a clock starting, because that tiara will one day sit on Catherine's head as queen. And when that day comes, the symbolic transfer will be so total and so unmistakable that everything Camilla's coronation moment represented will effectively be written over, and the country will move on inside a single afternoon. Sources suggest Anne and William both understand that perfectly, and they are not waiting passively for the day to arrive. Because in royal life, symbols are not decoration. They are power. The objects, the ceremonies, and the patronages attached to the crown tell the institution and the public who matters, who belongs, and whose legacy endures. That is the entire operating system of that family. Nobody says anything out loud. They hand you a thing, or they do not hand you a thing, and everybody in the room understands what happened. Camilla has spent 2 decades accumulating exactly those symbols: royal patronages, charitable associations, ceremonial roles that give her position, substance, and legitimacy beyond being Charles's wife. That accumulation was the whole project, and it worked, and it took her 20 years. Sources suggest that accumulation is allegedly being interrupted. Let me explain the patronage thing quickly, because it sounds ceremonial, and it is anything but. A royal patronage means a charity gets your name on its letterhead, and that name changes what that charity can raise, who takes its calls, and which government minister turns up to its anniversary dinner. For the royal holding it, A patronage is proof of usefulness. Lose them, and you are decorative. Hold hundreds of them, and you are load-bearing. Queen Elizabeth held hundreds of them at her death, and the redistribution of those patronages among working royals has been going on ever since 2022. Sources suggest Anne has allegedly been involved in certain of those decisions in ways that have quietly shaped where things landed. Specific high-profile patronages that were being positioned for Camilla allegedly redirected, not through any announced decision that anybody could point at publicly. A quiet reallocation that sources describe as reflecting priorities rather than logistics. And nobody can complain about it, because nobody can prove a thing was ever coming to them in the first place. In 2025, Charles granted William and Catherine the authority to issue royal warrants. That is the ability to publicly endorse brands and institutions on behalf of the crown. And it is a privilege monarchs have historically guarded very carefully indeed, because it is one of the few things the crown owns that has direct commercial value. Extending it to William and Catherine was a public signal about where the crown's symbolic weight is being deliberately repositioned. Toward the next generation. Toward William and Catherine. Away from the current reign and everything associated with it, and everything associated with it includes Camilla. Sources also suggest that decisions currently being made about how the reign of Charles III gets documented are reflecting William and Anne's priorities about how this period should be remembered. Official photographs, historical displays, crown documentary projects, a very dry list of things, right up until you understand what it decides. It decides who gets centered and who becomes peripheral, whose presence in the visual record is prominent, and whose is quietly minimized until a person leafing through it in 40 years' time barely registers that she was there. Royal history gets shaped by what somebody chose to preserve and how they framed it. The visual record of a reign becomes the historical record of that reign, and the historical record becomes legacy, which is the only prize anybody in that family has ever been playing for. Camilla's legacy, sources suggest, is allegedly being shaped right now by people with very specific views about what it ought to contain. And sources describe her private reaction to the cumulative weight of all of this as the response of somebody watching their own carefully constructed image being methodically and permanently taken apart, not in one dramatic moment that she could stand up and fight. In 100 quiet ones, each individually deniable, every one of them explainable by a diary clash, or a scheduling decision, or a routine review, and collectively devastating. I have to hold one more piece back for a few minutes, because it is the piece that tells you where her head is right now, and it is not a palace story at all. It is a house, a garden, and a decision she did not have to make. Camilla let go of Ray Mill House. No press release, no lifestyle magazine feature with soft photographs of the roses, no carefully managed announcement through anybody's office. A property that appeared on the market and then disappeared out of her portfolio. And the only reason anybody outside that family knows about it at all is that ownership of a house in this country is a matter of public record, and land registry entries do not care who you are married to. That was the Wiltshire retreat she had owned since before she married Charles, bought in the 90s with her own money after her divorce, hers alone in a way nothing else in her life has ever been. She called it her personal escape. She once called that garden the best therapy in the world. Gone. And sources suggest that decision tells you more about where Camilla's head is right now than anything she has said publicly in months, because people do not sell their sanctuaries casually. Think about the person in your own life who has one place that is theirs, a workshop, a caravan, a garden. They part with it when something has changed in how they see their own future, and usually because they have worked out they will not need it for the reason they thought they would. She closed a door she had been keeping open for 30 years. Right now, Camilla moves through multiple royal residences as an ordinary matter, of course. Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, Sandringham, Balmoral. The full infrastructure of a reigning queen, with access to the most significant private royal properties in existence, and nobody asks her a single question at any door she walks through. That picture changes completely on the day Charles dies. Sandringham passes to William. Balmoral passes to William. Buckingham Palace becomes William and Catherine's primary official residence. Every one of those properties that Camilla currently moves through as of right becomes a property she can only enter at William's invitation. Read that sentence again. At William's invitation. Sources suggest her likely inheritance consists of Clarence House, valued at around £72 million, and Highgrove at around £39 million. Enormous money by any normal measure, and completely inadequate as a substitute for the position she holds now, because the position is not made of houses. She goes from queen, with the full weight of the monarchy behind her, to a private citizen with the title of Queen Dowager, living in 2 houses at the discretion of a man who grew up watching what she did to his mother. Sources suggest Camilla understands that arithmetic very clearly, and I think she has understood it since the day a name vanished off that payroll without a word of explanation. And the family dimension compounds every part of it. Annabel Elliot, gone from the duchy payroll. Tom Parker Bowles, whose access to royal spaces is allegedly finished following the Balmoral situation. The Parker Bowles family's broader proximity to Crown events quietly narrowing year on year. Camilla spent 20 years building a network of access and association for her children and her siblings inside the institution she married into. Introductions, invitations, weekends, small favors and long lunches, all of it constructing a place for her people in a world that was never going to give them one. Sources suggest William is dismantling it piece by piece with a patience and a thoroughness that speaks to genuine long-term intent rather than temporary frustration. Frustration burns out in a fortnight. This has been going on since 2022. And then there is the Sarah Ferguson situation, which has become a liability Camilla genuinely cannot manage her way out of. Ferguson's name appears in the Epstein files released by the United States Justice Department, and her private messages to him were reported across British and American outlets earlier this year, including her own words describing him in terms that were very difficult for anybody to defend. There is no evidence of criminal wrongdoing on her part. I want to be precise about that because it matters. The association is real and documented, and that is a different thing from a crime, and the difference is one the public does not always bother with. And in the context of everything that has happened around Andrew, who was arrested in February this year, and whose situation has been running through that institution like water through a cracked wall ever since, sources suggest William has made his position completely clear to Camilla. Distance yourself from Ferguson publicly and permanently, or accept the consequences of the association. Camilla has not fully complied. She views ending a friendship that predates her entire royal life as personally impossible, and from her side, plain unfair. These 2 women were friends when Camilla was nobody, when the papers were still using her name as a punchline, and she is not built to drop somebody for being inconvenient. William views her continued loyalty to Ferguson as evidence of exactly the kind of judgment failure that justifies his concerns about Camilla's fitness to represent that institution going forward. That standoff is unresolved. And sources suggest it is costing Camilla influence inside that palace with every week it continues. And now I owe you the part I have been holding since the beginning, because there is one person in this story I have barely mentioned, and he is sitting in the middle of all of it. Charles. And his position in this situation is one of the more painful things in the whole story to look at properly, because he is the one person here who cannot win anything at all. He made a phone call to Anne in February of this year that sources describe as one of the most difficult conversations between those 2 siblings in decades. It was not angry. Sources are clear about that. Nobody shouted. Nobody accused anybody of anything. It was quiet and it was pained. The call of a man who understands exactly what his sister is doing and exactly why she is doing it, and finds himself completely unable to argue against it with any real conviction. The call lasted 40 minutes and ended with nothing resolved. That detail alone tells you a great deal about where Charles stands. 40 minutes is not a row. 40 minutes is 2 people who love each other going round and round a thing neither of them can fix, and hanging up, and both knowing the other one is right in their own way. He is 77 years old. Buckingham Palace announced in February 2024 that he had been diagnosed with cancer, and the specific type has never been disclosed publicly. Treatment ran through 20 2024 and into 2025, and he kept up his public duties across that whole period with a discipline even people who dislike him have had to acknowledge, turning up, shaking hands, asking people about their gardens. Discipline is not the same thing as strength. Keeping up appearances is not the same thing as having the capacity to fight on several fronts at once. Sources suggest his energy for managing complex internal family dynamics has diminished significantly over the past 18 months. And protecting Camilla from what William and Anne are allegedly doing requires exactly the kind of sustained, repeated, conflict-absorbing engagement he is least equipped for right now. Let me lay out what protecting her would involve, because I do not think most people have thought it through. It would mean telling William to restore access and privileges to people William deliberately removed. William would not comply, and Charles knows it. It would mean telling Anne to stop whatever she is allegedly doing with those archives. Anne would not comply either, and Charles knows that too, and he has known it since they were children. And it would mean positioning himself publicly against his own heir and his own sister at the same time, in defense of the woman that millions of people in this country still associate with his first wife's suffering. The political cost of that position is enormous. The personal cost is worse, and sources suggest he is entirely aware of both. But here is the dimension of Charles's position that sources describe as the most painful of all. And this is the part that made me stop and put the whole thing down for an afternoon. He knows why William and Anne feel the way they feel, because he was there, and he was the cause of it. He is the man who conducted the affair that Diana described in terms of profound personal devastation on national television to 23 million people. He is the reason that grief exists in this family at all. Every single thing his son is doing with a payroll, and every page his sister is allegedly reading in that archive traces back, in a straight line with no branches, to decisions Charles made himself when he was younger than William is now. Try arguing against your son's grief over his mother, when you are the reason the grief is there. Try telling your sister that protecting your wife's position matters more than honoring the sister-in-law, who suffered directly because of your own choices. Sources suggest Charles cannot make either of those arguments with genuine conviction because he does not fully believe them himself, and everybody in that building can hear it when he tries. There is a comment Charles allegedly made to a senior aide during this period that sources describe as quietly revealing, and it has stayed with me since I first read it. He allegedly expressed understanding. No anger at William in it, no frustration with Anne. Understanding. From the king. About the people moving against his own wife. That is a man who has done the arithmetic on his own life and arrived at an answer he does not like and cannot dispute. He knows the people closing doors around Camilla are doing it for reasons he created, and he has no answer for that. And at 77, in the middle of treatment, with a diary still full of engagements, he does not have the years left to build one. And that is the position Camilla is in. Her entire standing in that institution rests on one man. And that one man understands why the people dismantling her position are doing it, and cannot bring himself to tell them to stop. Now let me finish this properly, because there are two ways to read everything I have told you, and the one everybody reaches for first is the wrong one. There is a version of this story that looks like revenge. William and Anne systematically dismantling everything Camilla built piece by piece as payback for what she did to Diana. Clean, simple, satisfying, and it fits on a thumbnail. And there is another version that looks like something more considered and a great deal more lasting than revenge. Sources suggest the second version is closer to the truth, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Simple revenge would look like Camilla publicly humiliated, stripped of everything in one dramatic afternoon. A statement from the palace, a headline in every paper, the whole thing finished inside a news cycle. That is what people wanted in 1997 and never got. That is not what sources describe William and Anne as building. Sources describe something more patient, more permanent, and in the end far more meaningful than that. Think about the real substance of what Diana did with the position she had, underneath the fairy tale and the dress and the photographs everybody has seen 400 times. She touched AIDS patients when the establishment was still treating the disease as something shameful, and she did it without gloves, in front of cameras, on purpose, because she understood that one photograph would do more than 1,000 government leaflets. She walked through active minefields in Angola to make a political point about weapons that kill civilians years after a war ends. She sat with homeless people and looked them in the eye and treated them as fully human in a way senior royals were not supposed to do. And she did every bit of that against the active resistance of an institution that found her emotional directness threatening and her popularity destabilizing. They told her it was inappropriate. They told her, in that particular tone that building has, that it was beneath the dignity of a senior royal. She was right about all of it. The institution was wrong about all of it. And time has settled that argument so completely that nobody even bothers to have it anymore. William knows this, and he does not know it as historical analysis the way you and I know it. He knows it as lived personal experience. He watched his mother be right while the institution punished her for being right, and he watched what that punishment did to her at close range, in her own house when he was a child. Now he runs the institution. Sources suggest William's modernization agenda goes past good management practice. It is Diana expressed institutionally. The emotional intelligence she was told was inappropriate. The public accountability she was told was dangerous. The genuine human connection she was told was beneath the dignity of the role. All of it allegedly being built into the architecture of the monarchy William is constructing, brick by brick, with the money he now controls. Anne's contribution runs parallel to it. Decades of quiet, genuinely impactful work that stands as a living argument against performative royalty, which is the exact argument Diana made and paid everything to make. Those two women could not have been more different in temperament, and they were making the same point from opposite ends of the same building. And here is what sources suggest Camilla is slowly and painfully coming to understand. She won the battle. She won it comprehensively. She got Charles, she got the title, she got the coronation and the tiara and the seat beside the king and the rehabilitation and 30 years of the British press slowly changing its mind about her. Every single objective she had, she achieved. The war was never about Charles. The war was about Diana and what Diana represented, and whether the institution Diana tried to change would eventually become something worthy of the price she paid for trying. That was the real question the whole time, and Camilla was never a participant in it. She was an obstacle in it. William and Anne are allegedly building that institution right now. Not for revenge, for Diana. And Camilla has no counter-strategy for that because there is not one. You can outlast a press campaign, and she did for 20 years better than anybody expected. You cannot argue against a legacy. You cannot litigate grief. You cannot outmaneuver a son who watched his mother die and then spent 28 years quietly and deliberately deciding what to do about it. Diana never got to see what this monarchy could become. She got a Paris tunnel, 2 boys without a mother, and a family that barely lowered its flag until the country stood outside the gates and made it. And something is happening inside that palace right now that she never lived to see. Her son and her sister-in-law, the disciplined one and the grieving one, moving together, quietly and permanently, reshaping everything Camilla spent 2 decades building into something Diana would have recognized as hers. Legacy, better than revenge and considerably harder to survive. Camilla is still there. She will be at the next state occasion, on the king's left in the photographs, smiling at exactly the right moment, because she has been doing this for 20 years and she is extremely good at it, and nobody will see a thing on her face. And she will know, standing in that room, that her sister is off the payroll, that her son is off the guest lists, that the house in Wiltshire is gone, that a woman in Windsor is reading pages nobody was ever supposed to read, and that the man beside her understands why all of it is happening and will not lift a finger to stop it. That, more than any property dispute or payroll decision or symbolic tiara, is what sources describe as Camilla's darkest reality in decades. And the worst part for her is the part she cannot say out loud to anybody. She spent 30 years fighting a woman who has been dead since 1997, and she is losing.